Patient hospitalist program in the ICU at Silverton Hospital here in town. I've been here for about 17 years doing that. I had the privilege of actually being able to start the program back in 2017, so I guess that's 16 years. I don't have a canned talk. I was mostly going to do questions and answers. And we've got a light group here today, so there may not be that many questions.
Why don't you start by telling us how you ended up in Silverton?
Well, I grew up in Salem, and so I had always wanted to come back here. Silverton had always been kind of an aspiration. My folks had talked about moving over here a few times and that kind of thing. When I graduated high school, I went to college up in Tacoma, Pacific Lutheran. I then took a couple years out and worked as a group home counselor at a group home for delinquent boys. And then I decided through a whole long process that I did indeed want to go to medical school. It had been something that had been in the back of my head my whole life, but hadn't really committed. And then after about a year after college, I did decide, yep, that's what I wanted to do. So I spent that second year after college preparing. I took the MCAT and moved back home to try to save money. Worked at the Salem Hospital Rehab Center as a case manager and waited tables with the Red Robin at night. So that was a long year, and then I spent the year applying and traveling around and interviewing and that kind of thing. Ended up going into OHSU in '92, and then I went after that, decided I wanted to be a rural family medicine and do everything. I was inspired by a couple of small town family docs that I'd met along the way, and ended up in a rural family medicine residency in Idaho, and was there for 3 years. And then from there, I went into practice first for 4 years in a teeny tiny town called Cottonwood, Idaho. It's about 800 people in north central Idaho. There's not much there except for really cute farmers' daughters. So we were there for 4 years, and that's where I met Wendy, and we ended up being married. The type of medicine there was everything. It's like what Silverton was back in the old days. So I was doing emergency room and inpatient and outpatient and babies and scopes and the whole thing. It was really fun. Plus I got to go bird hunting out my back door, and I could go steelhead fishing right down the hill from where I was at on the Salmon River. And so it was a pretty fun place to cut my teeth in medicine. A lot of drama and a lot of intense things happen at night sometimes when you're on your own in the middle of nowhere, and there weren't very many doctors, and when we were on, you're on all by yourself, and so that was sometimes scary. We then spent the next 4 years in Colfax, Washington. That's another small town, same type of medical practice. And that's where my first two boys were born, Joe and Eli, who, I don't know if any of you know them, they're huge now. Joey's a sophomore in college, and Eli is a senior in high school, and they're both taller than me and bigger and everything. So after that 4 years in Colfax, I was a little burned out, and I was actually looking to leave medicine, to be honest. I was looking at other options. I took, before I went to medical school, one of my options, I thought about education and teaching, but I also thought about seminary. And at this point then, after the 8 years in practice, the last 4 years in Colfax, I actually took a seminary course and kind of dipped my toe in that while I was still practicing. And decided again that it wasn't for me for a whole variety of reasons. But through that process, I was kind of stuck in the mud. I was not making a decision. I was miserable where I was at and not happy. And I came home from work one day, and Wendy said, well, I told Beth, who was our neighbor, and her husband was the clinic manager of my group. She said, I told Beth that you were going to resign and we're going to move. And I said, really? Okay. So kind of kicked the things into gear because it was not a sustainable situation, and I'm very thankful that happened. So I put my notice in, and we then started searching for where to go next. And I didn't want to keep doing the type of medicine I was doing. The outpatient stuff was not a good fit, and I wanted to either do emergency room or inpatient. And so as it happened, my 10-year medical school reunion was then, and I met with a guy and was telling him where I was at. He said, you got to give Silverton a call. That's a good place. He was a specialist in Portland that came down and did some things down there. So I called Silverton, and the first thing they said is, well, do you want to be a hospitalist? I said, Yeah, actually, that's exactly what I would like to be. And they were starting a program, and so I came down and interviewed. It was just a fortuitous timing on my part and their part, and I came down and they liked me enough, and I liked them, so they hired me to start the program. And so in 2007, we started the hospitalist program. First part-time, just on the weekends. We would cover, and the community docs would cover their own patients during the week. And then after a few months, we went 7 days a week because people liked having us around, I guess. And when we went to 7 days a week, we picked up a third partner, John Gilliam. So about 6 months after I got here, John joined us as well. So we had three of us. Dan Harris was the other one I started with. And then we've just been doing that ever since. And so Silverton is great because it's a 15-minute drive to my parents and my sister, my nieces and nephews and aunts and uncles and all that here in Salem still. It's a nice place to raise kids, and that's how we ended up here. So it's been a good journey. It kept me able to be a doctor by finding this place. It was really a perfect fit. The medicine, the culture, the lifestyle that it allowed, and being closer to family and having a place to raise my family. So that's that story. Trying to think, any other specific.
In the beginning of post-high school, you talked about you did some case management, and which sounds more social worky type.
Very much.
Do you pull that into what you do now?
Oh, especially my first 8 years of practice in kind of this advanced primary care where you're doing all the things in a rural place. They used to joke that your job is to see people who think they are physically sick, and some of them might be, but there's a tremendous amount of social, emotional, psychological, and social particularly overlay on people's health. You can't separate out people's physical health from their circumstances and from their relationships and from their, are they, do they get enough food? Are they living in a place where they can be safe? Are they, all those things play in. The issues with addiction and substance abuse play in with all that. So yeah, and actually my parents are, I grew up in a house of, they're educators, but they also both ended up with a master's degree in counseling. And all through middle school and high school, they were both in private practice, marriage and family counseling. And so our dinner table conversation oftentimes was in that realm. And it is beneficial to me now because it's a big part of dealing with people in any way, shape, or form. My first job after college, I was a counselor at a group home for delinquent boys for a year. So it was a transitional facility that wasn't a lockdown place. It was either boys that were coming out of a lockdown place or that were moving into a lockdown place at some point. And so that was my first job and after college. And then the case management was basically working with people who were work injuries and so dealing with that. And that's hours of conversation, but that's a fertile ground for all sorts of non-organic issues that affect people's health. So things that, all the incentives that are built into a system like our workers' comp system come into play, and how do you get people to navigate that and recover and be healthy and be functional again if their life is not as simple as you think. So. And now I do just inpatient medicine, so I don't have a longitudinal relationship with people. I get to see them for a short period of their life when usually they're in some type of crisis. And all of the social aspects play into that as well. You get all sorts of family dysfunction that kind of comes to a head oftentimes when people are in the hospital, and there's all sorts of personal beliefs play in for people on how we can take care of them best. And trying to think of there's all sorts of cultural issues. We live in an area where we have a large, fairly heterogeneous Russian population, and there's all different populations within the Russian population. They all have specific beliefs that if we can navigate those and understand them, we can help them more. Same thing with our Hispanic population, again, specific beliefs. They're not uniform. There's a real heterogeneity in there. And so trying to tease out some of those things in a short time when you only have a day or two or three taking care of people can be a challenge. It all plays in. We're not fragmented. Our wholeness is always there when we're ill. And so I think all the other aspects of people's lives play in for that. Pastor Lee had said that the series that we're doing here is to kind of talk about how faith interacts with medicine and I don't have a pat answer on that front from me. I mentioned that I thought about going to seminary before I went to medical school, and if to be really blunt, to confess, the reason I decided to go with medicine is because I had so many doubts and so many questions, and I decided that, boy, what if I lose my faith, I still want to be able to have a job. and at that point in my life, I had more questions than answers, and I still do. And I didn't feel like being in a pastoral role would have been a good fit, even though it's something that I'm drawn to in other ways. I read a book right around that time, right when I got out of college, called A Prayer for Holy Meaning. And one of the characters in that book is a pastor who had lost his faith. And it was, and I thought, how can I be that guy? I want to be useful, no matter where my life takes me and where I end up. And so I think it's been a good decision. But it's always been in the back of my head that, to explore that area more.
Leah always does these awful put you on the spot sort of questions. So
Bring it on.
I'm going to channel. So God moments.
God moments. I have had some weird ones in upper division biology classes in college. An epiphany about how everything is all connected in a way that you wouldn't necessarily know. I decided I grew up in a family, a Christian family, and my subculture that I was in as a kid was, I was heavily involved in young life and church camps and youth group, and I read the Bible cover to cover when I was in 3rd grade, and I took it very seriously, and my faith from a young age all the way up for most of my life has always been centered around trying to get the right answer, trying to have the right answer in my head, and intellectual understanding. And so I've discovered as I've gotten older and older is that I'm never going to know the answers that I want to know in the way I want to know them, and making my peace with that, and learning to live with the ambiguity and the mystery and just the unknowableness has been what I've evolved into in the later part of my life. And in that context, when I was younger, I decided that I wasn't going to be afraid of things that were true. Even if it took me someplace that wasn't comfortable or separated me from other people, and it does. When I grew up in a place that was relatively conservative religiously, my parents weren't so much, but my friend group was. And when a big part of my early faith was hashing out what I think is a false war between science and religion, and when I made some decisions on what I believed, it separated me from people that I loved and cared about in some ways. Not my true friends though. My true friends, it didn't matter. But there were some people that it was a litmus test that you had to believe certain things in a certain way, and if you didn't, they weren't going to have you in their life. And so I lost a few people like that in my life, which turns out it's not really a big loss. So anyway, the pursuit of truth, no matter where it takes, I had a concept of, when it comes to Christianity, that I wanted to peel back the cultural overlay that kind of builds up around religion. That there's something under the religious part of it that's real, that comes through, but we have all these things that get on top of it that can sometimes obscure it. I have a home video of when Joe, my oldest, was about 2 years old or 3 years old. It was Christmas time. I'm videoing him, and it's a big family, there are lots of cousins and all that. So there's these mounds of presents that have been opened, and just chaos and little kids, and I panned the camera over to the far corner of the room, and Joe was playing with the bubble wrap. He's playing with the packaging, and I think that's a great analogy, because I think I think it's a human tendency to sometimes mistake the packaging for the actual gift. And there's some aspects of the superficial aspects of religion and church that is kind of the packaging. And the gift is something that gets transmitted through that. And so my early life, I was trying to strip away the packaging as much as I can. And it's kind of, it ends up being in some ways a false road, because you can't, I'm human. I can't strip away my humanity. I can't strip away all those things. It's always going to be imperfect. I'm never going to be able to get to the core and know it perfectly. And that's another thing I've evolved to as I've gotten older, is being comfortable with, and a sense of humility towards not having answers and not knowing how everything's working, not really being able to explain in a scientific, detailed way, why are we here? And why does this happen? Why does evil happen? Why do people die? All those things that you can dig and you can never ultimately completely answer them. And it's okay. I have a quote that I have kept in my journal for about 25 years from this time of my life. And it's from Frederick Buechner. I don't even know what book it's from, but he said, if you tell me Christian commitment is a kind of a thing that happens to you once and for all, like some kind of a spiritual plastic surgery, I say, go to. You're either pulling the wool over your own eyes or trying to pull it over mine. Every morning, you should wake up in your bed and ask yourself, can I believe it all again today? No, better still, don't ask it until after you've read the New York Times, until after you've studied that daily record of the world's brokenness and corruption, which should always stand side by side with your Bible. And then ask yourself if you can believe it all, the gospel of Jesus Christ again for that particular day. If you answer always yes, then you probably don't really know what believing means. At least 5 times out of 10, the answer should be no. Because the no is as important as the yes, maybe more so. The no proves that you are human, in case you should ever doubt it. And then if some morning the answer happens to be really yes, it should be a yes that is choked with confession and tears and great laughter. So that's a quote I've had with my for years, and that's so my God moments. It depends on the day. So, some days it can be real and meaningful, and my interactions with patients who are sick and it can be incredibly powerful and good things happen. And there's other days when the cynicism wins, and you look around and you think, this is all, none of this matters. Why are we doing any of this? We're just getting on wheels. And so I would not necessarily hold my own faith up as a model for other people to follow, but that's the reality of mine. It's a day-to-day thing oftentimes. What I do come back to over and over again is grace. Every second of existence, none of it should even be here. The fact that anything exists versus nothing, I still, a lot of mornings wake up and in awe, taking a breath, the fact that anything happens to us at all, let alone good things, is remarkable and undeserved, and I didn't do anything to deserve any of the things I have. So a sense of humility and grace and thankfulness is what I focus on, not so much specifics of theology. Because again, the answers aren't attainable in the way I want them to be. You asked about God moments. Small ones that are powerful, the birth of my children, and just the miracles of that. I don't have any. Medicine, there's lots of times where people get better when you don't think they should. And there's lots of times when people get better and they shouldn't. There's always a sense of, you do things and at the end of the day, it's out of our control still, even though we can do all the right treatments and that and have an understanding of the diseases and know that things work in a certain way. Usually, so I haven't had, I've heard other people talk about, oh, there's this miracle healing, and I've never experienced anything like that, because every healing is a miracle. Every moment is, I've the ones that seem that way, when you dig more, usually there's an explanation of what happened. There's a misdiagnosis on the front end, or some other thing. Most of my God moments, I think, are, in all honesty, again, I don't put myself up as a model, but in the last decade, life has gotten so crazy busy with 4 kids, and just the reality of what medicine has been like this last decade. I don't spend a lot of time on my inner life, literally. And that's something I'm looking forward to getting back to, as someday, as my life hopefully calms down and simplifies a bit as the kids grow up and move out, and as I back off hopefully at some point from working too many hours and that kind of thing. I've had lots of kind of epiphany mountaintop moments when I've been fly fishing in the middle of the river. I've had on top of a mountain after backpacking, being in awe of our world. That's one other concept that I've carried with me all my life is, Francis Bacon said, there's 2 ways to know God. You can study the book of his word, which is the Bible, or you can study the book of his works, which is basically science, and diving into his creation. The more you know the creation, you learn more about the Creator. And so I've had religious type moments of just awe and appreciation when I've been able to be out of my own head and out of the chaos of our society and out in beautiful places. So that's been something that's worked for me as well. I don't know if I answered that correctly or if I got too gratuitous.
That's lovely.
This isn't a medicine thing. This is just more of a limited mind being But I always come back to just the improbability that any of this exists. When you look at the universe as this infinitely large and infinitely desolate and cold, and that's true. But then this other truth is I wake up and I have this beautiful daughter that hugs me and kisses me good morning, and I have this people that love me and the warmth and the love that is real also. And those 2 things are a paradox. The reality of what the universe is, and then the reality of warmth and love and faith being real also. And it doesn't devalue it. Some people say, oh, if you focus on the universe, it just makes everything seem useless. And I disagree. I think it makes everything we have here more valuable. When something's in short supply, it's more valuable. And we are the only place in the entire universe where love exists, where warmth exists. And our job is to appreciate that and try to create more of it, maybe a conduit for that here, because our time is incredibly short and brief, and that makes it even more valuable and more important that we use it well. So that's, again, not medical, that's just musings in my brain.
One of the questions I was asked was, how do I deal with death with someone that I've lost, or either not personal but professionally? Where's your comfort with that?
We do a lot of end of life, as you would expect, in a hospital, in an ICU. I remember, I'll never forget this lady, because the stereotype is that when people have especially if they have a long illness and they come to a point where there's not any other medical things to do, that there's a sense of peace. There's not always. And I'll never forget this lady. She had advanced cancer. It was everywhere. And she wasn't very old. And she had grandkids that she still wanted to be with. She was not done. But there were not any medical interventions that were left. And she ended up in our hospital after her oncologist in Salem and said, there's really nothing else. And she ended up in our hospital for, I think, some type of intractable pain or nausea, I don't remember what. And I went in and tried to talk about, what do you want this next time of your life to be like, because it's really short. And I've done this a lot, and I'm actually pretty good at it. And I know how to talk about this with people. And the minute I brought it up, she stood up and she looked at me, and I'll never forget, she had this rage in her eyes. And she says, I don't want to die. And then she sat back down. And I'll never forget that, because she lived another 2 weeks. And so it's not always the way it is in the movies and the books. It is sometimes. And it's really individual. I have not seen a pattern. I've seen people with a strong faith battle it right to the end and not be at peace with it. I've seen atheists be at peace and know that things will be fine when they come to the end. I have not seen a pattern that I can identify. But I think it's, there was a time where I was, I think, depressed. I was seeing a lot of people die and hadn't really, it makes you focus on your own mortality. It brings up things in your own, and I think it's been a blessing overall, because it's forced me to realize, okay, yeah, this is really temporary. Everything is short, and it's so easy to forget as life gets busy. So I think it's been healthy for me in the long run to be in a position to help people process when they're at the end of their life, and how to go through that, and how to decide, are you at the end of life? Sometimes it's, there's a lot of gray area oftentimes. There's sometimes people can what we call meet criteria for a hospice or being at the end of life, but they're not ready. It's okay, you don't have to, and there's things we can do that can, and then other times people really don't have a medical reason to be at the end, but they say, I'm just tired of doctors and taking care of things, and so I'm just going to focus on my quality of life right now, and we'll just, whatever happens, happens, and so that can be the path that people take also. So the reality of death, I think, is a blessing to keep it in front of us, because it makes life more valuable. I guess maybe the one pattern I do see is in people that struggle. It's usually family members, actually, as I'm thinking about it. When somebody is at the end, the more common pattern is that the patient, the person themselves, has some sense of what's real and what's going to happen, but oftentimes the people around them really don't. And so that can cause a lot of crises and discord between family members. It's kind of a cliche, the black sheep son from the East Coast flies in, hasn't seen anybody for 10 years and demands everybody do things differently. So those times tend to bring to the surface a lot of things that sometimes have been buried in people's families and lives for a long time. I have another patient that I remember, and this is from when I was in Colfax on that front, and he had, Colfax is in eastern Washington, and it takes about 3 or 4 hours drive to get to Seattle. And he was in the last, his time was short also, he had cancer that was everywhere. But his wife was not ready to give up. He was, he knew. But his wife was still dragging him to Seattle once a week for these therapies that were making him ill and making him feel bad. And so that was a conversation, not with him, but with both of them, and trying to help her, come to terms with it in a way that wouldn't ruin what little time he had left. And so the stakes were high for him in terms of, he actually was pretty functional and comfortable still, but we were wasting it by going and doing treatments that wouldn't have any effect in the long term, or ruining his quality of life. So that was a very powerful time as well. So that's,
Yeah. I'm curious, when you're in those moments, do you feel like you have someone helping you find the words?
I think I've been doing the hospital practice. I've been in practice for over 20 years. And so I've done it a lot. And so I've, at some point, I think I did. I think because it's, when you first start early in a career, when you do this all the time, it's an intimidating topic to start to initiate with people. And there's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of trying to read body language and unspoken cues. Where are they at? What, how do you approach? And so I think I have developed some feel. I don't know how I describe it. I don't have a decision tree I go through. I kind of read people and do some open-ended questions and talking and kind of see where they lead. Usually people that want to talk about it will open the topic themselves and give you permission to ask in ways. I think the key is, in order to talk authentically with people about this, you really have to have wrestled with it yourself. And I think people can smell the hypocrisy if you're giving them canned answers. I've lived through it in my family. My brother-in-law died of a brain tumor, leaving 3 little girls, 6, 5, and 3 years old. So I went in a several-month period where I was taking off a week of work in Idaho and driving over here. They lived in Salem and taking care of him, and we kind of did the rotations. And so there's been that. I don't formulate it in my head like someone helping me, but there's definitely a spiritual aspect to those conversations and trying to meet people where they are. And sometimes they're not Christians, sometimes they're atheists, sometimes they're something I don't even know what they are. But there is a commonality to coming to the end and dealing with those things. And so it's not a specific, there's not a script, I guess, yeah. But there are, sometimes you gently want to create a crisis. And by that I mean, when people are in denial, like the wife of the one, she was hurting the person she loved the most and she didn't realize it. It was from good intention. So creating the crisis by gently saying, here's the reality is we won't make it to Christmas. So what do you want this next 3 months to look like? And kind of gently bringing her to a place where she can get her head around it and make better decisions for herself and for him. And it's a servant for him too, because he didn't want to fight his wife. He loved her and was trying to help her, through this time as well. I forgot where I was going with that. There was going to be an end. I lost my train of thought. I know some of the other docs out here talked a lot about the COVID time, and this stuff came up a lot in COVID, as you would expect. I had more people die in a 6-month period under my care than I had in the 20 years combined. So it was traumatic, that whole time. Everybody remembers it. It was a chaotic, tumultuous time. There was just a lot of non-medical things that you had to wade through when you're taking care of people that were really sick. In some ways, I was on the front lines, being an ICU and inpatient medicine doc in Silverton. In some ways, I was shielded because the people that were really, really sick, we had to put on ventilators, we were able to get an agreement with the bigger hospitals in Portland to take them, even when they didn't have room. So they had people lined up in hallways on ventilators and things like that. But we had, there were several times where we were just overwhelmed. And people didn't get as good a care as they would have if we had time. People that didn't believe in COVID died of COVID and were mad at me for telling them they had COVID. And there was a lot of, the first 6 months particularly, it hit in March of 2020. And I don't know, people have forgotten this, but it hit in Italy first, and there was all of these doctors and nurses that were dying. film exposure, and then it was here, and we started getting our head around what this was. And we didn't have masks. We didn't have tests to know who had it, who didn't, so people would show up sick, and the hospital had no masks. And so there was a sense of vulnerability, you know, for just my own personal safety, and am I going to bring something home and get my kids sick? So that whole first 6 months, there's no vaccine. We didn't really even, you know, we had this vague idea there's this weird virus that hits people's lungs hard and tends to hurt older people, but there's a lot of people in their 40s and 50s that are dying from it too and getting really sick. And I remember that during that time, I would go to work and I'd wear one pair of scrubs. And when I came home, I wouldn't come into the house. I would come into the garage and I would take off my clothes and strip down there, and there was a shower out there, and I'd shower there. I wouldn't let anybody touch my clothes at home. I would take care of those myself and get them washed and sterilized. So I was just afraid about it, and afraid with good reason. You know, there were people younger than me that I took care of that died, and lots of people that didn't die but were sick in a life-changing way that I didn't want. So that was it's surreal now to think back on it. There was, I can't remember which wave it was. We had the original wave in December of January 2021, and I remember individual patients from there. I remember having family conferences in the parking lot in the rain because people couldn't come in. So, you know, one huge family had, 15, 20 people, and their mom was on a ventilator, and I was struggling to find a place to send her that could take care of her, and her prognosis was she almost certainly wouldn't live. And trying to have that conversation in the pouring down rain, because there was nowhere to be in a parking lot in the wintertime. It was December. That was the first wave. She's the one that I remember from that. The second wave was the Delta wave that following August. And I remember that was the time where we got overwhelmed, and we were on vacation at the beach, and we had to come home early because we were swamped. We had my partners were overwhelmed, and so we cut our vacation short and we came back, and there was again people lined up in the halls that there's no physical beds to put them in, no physical rooms to put them in. They were in gurneys, and there was one patient. I remember at the time he didn't have COVID, but he came in with a brain bleed. And the ER was completely overwhelmed, and they told him that his wife that it probably wasn't treatable, and he was just sort of put in for comfort care. I know the guy, and I know he wasn't comfort care, and I was able, when I came back, I was able to actually dig in a little bit, and it was treatable, and we were able to get him transferred, and we saved his life. And that was one that he would have died just from the system being overwhelmed and not being able to take care of something that was treatable. I have another patient I remember. He was 38, maybe 40. And this was, I can't remember which wave this was, but it was in December, so it might have been the first wave. No, it was later because the vaccines were available and he wasn't vaccinated. But he had he wasn't militant about it. He just kind of had a lot of doubts about medicine in general. And he was young and healthy for the most part. And he came in with COVID and he'd gotten it because it was Thanksgiving, and they'd had a gathering, and his dad showed up and said, "Yeah, I'm sick. Is it okay if I stay?" And he said, "Oh, yeah, you're fine." And his dad had it, and his dad was fine. That's the other thing. There's a real randomness to who got really sick and who didn't. And the dad ended up being fine. This guy got really sick, and he ended up on a ventilator and beyond that on ECMO for over 2 months. He was in an ICU corner. He lived, but he's disabled now, in a pulmonary disabled for the rest of his life. And I never forget, he was just kind of bewildered. It's real. It's real. And because there was a real disconnect in that time also culturally. There's everybody remembers that go to work and be immersed in all this death and people with this, and then come home and there's all this just disconnect about people saying that it's whatever conspiracy. It was just a really difficult time for me personally, because I have a lot of people in my life that they never really said it to my face or anything like that, 'cause it never came up, because everybody's mature and to a certain extent. Just a sense of cynicism that somehow it's overblown and it's not real. But then I go to work and we're overwhelmed, kind of come out, and it's kind of life as normal for most people until it's the moment it's not, and then they're in. And I remember there was somewhere in there, we were on vacation in central Washington, and I knew, like I said, we were keeping track, I knew that the hospitals in Bend were completely overwhelmed. And we went on some outing, I think we went to Smith Rock or something for a hike, and we drove by the hospital in Edmond, and I knew what was going on in there. But our life was just going on as normal out here. But I knew what was going on. I had a friend that was a doctor in that hospital, and with misery and disease and death, and nurses and doctors and everybody being overwhelmed, and it was all happening in this contained place. Yeah, I still haven't completely processed that away. I can articulate. It was a very surreal time when those big surgeries were happening.
Has there been any, I think you're going to say no, but has there been any effort to try to help people in the health community psychologically deal with what has happened? I mean, talk about trauma.
Yeah.
To watch two surges, and the second surge basically came after the vaccine was available.
Yeah.
People were refusing to take the vaccine. I mean, how do you even...
There's a lot of people that are no longer in nursing,
Yeah.
no longer in medicine. That's been one of the problems we're having now, is they're really short-staffed, because anybody that was anywhere close to retirement age just left, and I don't blame them. There's not any effective, systematic way to address that. I think kind of everybody has to advocate for themselves, I guess, in some ways, and I think all of the big systems are under immense pressure right now also. Financially, I don't know, Legacy, which is our hospital system, has just announced a month or two ago that they're basically going to allow themselves to be taken over. They're going bankrupt. And so they're going to be absorbed by OHSU in a couple of years is the plan. Providence is having similar situations. There's strikes happening everywhere among nurses. It's a really chaotic time across the board.
Do you think some of the strikes that we're seeing is a rebound?
I think I see it as just a general chaos. Our health system has always been really, really dysfunctional. And COVID exposed it more and broke things that were barely hanging on. And so I think it's been a long time coming, and COVID maybe, made it happen sooner. We have a really irrational system nationwide, and it's so multi-layered, there's not an easy answer. But I think we're going to be in a time of chaos for the foreseeable future, and there's going to be a big shakeout, and I don't know where it'll land. I don't know that it'll ever be resolved perfectly. I'm absolutely sure it's not going to be calmed down very much by the time I'm done being a doctor in the next 10, 15 years. But who knows? But we're seeing there's a lot of young nurses, young doctors, young therapists that are coming in. Not enough, but there are some coming. I think there's some changes that need to happen in our society as far as how we train people, how we decide. There's kind of a mechanism that limits the number of nurses and doctors and therapists we can train. So maybe we need to change how these training programs happen and how they're funded and all that to get a better pipeline. I don't know. It's the complexity.